Long before the rise of empires and the march of modern civilization, there was a people whose name still echoes through time, whispered in legends, carved into ancient stones, and woven into the very fabric of Europe's untamed landscapes. The Celts, a civilization so fierce, so enigmatic, that even their disappearance remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Picture this: warriors clad in intricate bronze, their hair streaked with lime to stand like ghosts on the battlefield, their druids conducting rituals under ancient oaks where the veil between worlds grew thin. These were not just tribes, they were a force of nature, a culture steeped in secrets we're still unraveling today. What if I told you that beneath the surface of what we think we know about the Celts lies a hidden world of astonishing discoveries? Forgotten rituals, cryptic symbols, and clues scattered across centuries that hint at a sophistication far beyond their reputation as barbarians. For too long, their story has been overshadowed by the Romans who conquered them or the myths that romanticized them. But now we're pulling back the curtain. Imagine standing in the heart of a mist-shrouded forest where the Celts once communed with gods we can barely name, where sacred cauldrons brewed visions of the future, and where the very land itself was alive with meaning. This isn't just history, it's a journey into the unknown. So why do these ancient secrets matter today? Because the Celts were more than warriors or wanderers. They were storytellers, astronomers, and masters of a spiritual world that defies simple explanation. Their legacy lingers in the languages we speak, the festivals we celebrate, even the superstitions we half remember. And here's the thrilling part: we're still finding pieces of their puzzle. From hidden tombs lined with celestial maps to artifacts that suggest a network of trade spanning continents, every discovery rewrites what we thought we knew. So if you've ever felt the pull of mystery, the itch to uncover what's been lost to time, then you're in the right place. Strap in. We're about to dive deep into the 25 hidden secrets of the Celtic tribes, and trust me, what we're about to reveal will change how you see the ancient world forever. Hidden in plain sight, scratched along the edges of ancient standing stones and weathered oak branches, lies the first great secret of the Celts, the mysterious Ogham script. Unlike the flowing letters of Latin or Greek, Ogham is stark and angular, a series of straight lines and notches that seem to mimic the very bones of the trees the Celts held sacred. Picture running your fingers over a stone weathered by centuries, feeling the grooves where some long-forgotten hand carved messages meant to outlast empires. But here's where the mystery deepens. Ogham wasn't just a way to write names or mark territory. It was likely a sacred code tied intimately to the Druids, the Celtic spiritual elite who guarded their knowledge with fierce secrecy. Each stroke may have carried double meanings, blending practical communication with layers of spiritual symbolism. Some inscriptions align with burial sites, whispering of the afterlife, while others appear to trace property boundaries, suggesting Ogham was as much about law as it was about magic. And yet, despite surviving examples scattered from Ireland to Wales, we've only deciphered fragments. Whole passages remain stubbornly opaque, as if the Druids designed their script to keep secrets even from time itself. Why does this matter? Because Ogham hints at a sophistication the Romans never credited to the Celts. While Rome dismissed them as illiterate barbarians, the Celts were etching their thoughts into the landscape with precision. Some scholars believe Ogham might even map to an early form of sign language, a silent way to communicate under the watchful eyes of enemies. Others argue certain symbols correlate with tree lore, each character representing a different sacred tree like oak or yew, embedding the natural world directly into their writing. The most tantalizing clue: a handful of Ogham stones bear markings that don't match any known Celtic dialect, suggesting lost languages or even encrypted Druidic teachings. Imagine standing before one of these stones, knowing the answers to centuries-old mysteries are right there, just beyond reach. That's the enigma of the Celts. They built their wisdom to endure, but not always to be easily understood. And as we chip away at decoding Ogham, we're not just translating words, we're eavesdropping on an entire worldview, one notch at a time. Deep in the heart of ancient Europe, where sunlight filtered through dense canopies and the air hummed with unseen energy, stood the sacred groves of the Celts, living temples where earth and spirit intertwined. These weren't just clusters of trees, they were sanctuaries pulsing with life, places where the veil between worlds grew so thin that druids could whisper to gods and ancestors alike. The Celts didn't build their temples from stone, they grew them, tending to oaks, ashes, and yews with reverence, believing each grove was a doorway to the otherworld, a realm as real to them as the soil beneath their feet. What made these groves so powerful? It wasn't just their beauty, it was their role as conduits for rituals that shaped Celtic life. Under their branches, druids performed ceremonies tied to the seasons, the stars, and the cycles of life and death. Some groves hosted bloodless offerings of mead and grain, while others echoed with the solemn chants of initiation rites where young warriors pledged themselves to tribal gods. The Romans, who later wrote of these places with a mix of awe and disdain, recorded groves where no axe could be lifted without permission, where even a fallen branch was left to rot as an offering to the spirits. This wasn't mere superstition, it was a sacred contract with nature, one that bound the Celts to the land as deeply as their own breath. But the groves also hid a darker truth: their very power made them targets. When Rome set out to dismantle Celtic culture, they didn't just burn villages, they methodically destroyed these spiritual centers, felling ancient trees and scattering the druids who guarded them. Why? Because the Romans understood something modern historians often overlook. The groves weren't just religious sites, they were the beating heart of Celtic resistance. To cut down a sacred oak was to sever a tribe's connection to its gods, its history, its very identity. In one chilling account, Roman soldiers described finding groves adorned with human skulls, trophies of battles, or perhaps grim warnings to outsiders. Whether propaganda or fact, these stories reveal how fiercely the Celts fought to protect these spaces, and how terrified their enemies were of the magic they contained. Today, archaeologists trace the ghostly outlines of these groves through pollen samples and scorched earth, uncovering post holes where wooden shrines once stood or offerings buried in the roots of long-gone trees. Some believe the Celts chose specific groves for their alignment with solstice sunrises or magnetic anomalies, suggesting a knowledge of the land's hidden energies. Even now, places like the Forest of the Ardennes in Belgium or the misty glens of Scotland carry whispers of that old reverence, where locals still avoid cutting certain trees or speak of thin places where the past feels unnervingly close. The sacred groves may be gone, but their legacy lingers, a testament to a people who saw the divine not in distant heavens, but in the rustle of leaves and the gnarled roots beneath their feet. Among the most chilling and misunderstood practices of the Celtic tribes was their ritual of headhunting, a tradition that went far beyond mere battlefield brutality. To the Celts, the severed head wasn't just a trophy of war, it was a sacred object, a vessel of power holding the essence of a fallen enemy's soul. Imagine a victorious warrior returning home, not just with the spoils of combat, but with the preserved heads of his foes, carefully displayed as both a warning and a source of supernatural protection. The Romans, who recorded this practice with horrified fascination, described Celtic chieftains decorating their doorposts and chariots with these grim tokens, believing they warded off evil and channeled the strength of the dead. But why the head? In Celtic cosmology, the head was considered the seat of the soul, the very core of a person's identity, wisdom, and life force. By taking an enemy's head, a warrior didn't just claim victory, he captured a fragment of their spirit, harnessing its energy for his own tribe's benefit. Some accounts suggest druids even performed rituals to quiet these spirits, transforming them from vengeful ghosts into allies. Archaeologists have found skulls mounted on spikes at ancient hill forts, their eye sockets sometimes filled with precious stones or placed near ritual fires, hinting at ceremonies meant to honor or appease the dead. The practice wasn't just about dominance, it was deeply spiritual. Classical writers like Diodorus Siculus claimed Celtic warriors refused to sell these heads for any price, even when offered their weight in gold. To part with one would be to surrender the power it held. In Ireland, legends speak of talking heads that prophesied or sang after death, like the mythical hero Bran the Blessed, whose severed head continued to protect his people for decades. This blurring of life and death, trophy and talisman, reveals a world-view where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual were fluid, even negotiable. Yet headhunting also served a darker, pragmatic purpose: psychological warfare. A tribe known to collect heads would strike fear into rivals long before battle began. The sheer spectacle of decorated shrines or chariots draped with decaying heads was a visceral reminder of the cost of defiance. Over time, as the Celts clashed more frequently with Rome, the practice faded, not just from outside pressure but from shifting beliefs. Christianity's spread further erased the spiritual logic behind it, reducing what was once a sacred act to a barbaric footnote. But in the silent gaze of a 2,000-year-old skull, polished by reverence and time, we catch a fleeting glimpse of a people who saw the afterlife not as an abstract heaven, but as something you could hold in your hand. The Druids were far more than priests, they were the living libraries of the Celtic world, the keepers of knowledge so potent it was never entrusted to parchment or stone. Imagine a class of scholars who could recite laws, genealogies, and astronomical cycles from memory, who mediated disputes between tribes with a word, and whose rituals could allegedly summon storms or curse entire armies. Their power didn't come from weapons or wealth, but from something far more dangerous: forbidden wisdom, passed down through generations in hushed tones under the canopy of sacred groves. Julius Caesar himself, who witnessed their influence firsthand, wrote that Druidic training could take 20 years, not because their teachings were complex, but because every law, every prophecy, every incantation had to be memorized with absolute precision. Why this obsession with secrecy? The Druids understood the fragility of written words. Scrolls could burn, stones could shatter, but knowledge locked in the minds of initiates was immune to conquest. Caesar noted their refusal to record their doctrines, suspecting it was a way to maintain control over the masses. Yet there's another, more profound layer. The Celts believed spoken words carried magic. To write a spell or a sacred law was to dilute its power, stripping it of the breath that gave it life. When a Druid chanted a healing rite or pronounced a verdict, the act of speaking itself was part of the ritual, reverberating through the air like a living force. Their roles stretched far beyond the spiritual. Druids were judges whose rulings could halt feuds between warring clans with a single decree. They were scientists tracking lunar cycles to plant crops and predict eclipses, events they likely interpreted as omens. Some historians argue they even served as covert diplomats, weaving alliances through marriages and treaties brokered under oak boughs, but their most feared duty: conducting the grisly rituals Rome would later use to justify their eradication. Caesar's accounts describe wicker men filled with sacrificial victims set ablaze to appease the gods, a claim hotly debated by modern scholars who note his tendency to exaggerate Celtic barbarity to legitimize his conquests. Yet the darkest whispers surround their arcane disciplines. Legends speak of Druids brewing potions that induced prophetic trances or curses that blighted crops for generations. Archaeological finds hint at ritualistic use of hallucinogenic plants, suggesting some rites may have been literal voyages into other realms. The irony. Rome's systematic purge of the Druids, burning their groves, slaughtering their ranks, only cemented their mystique. By erasing them, the Romans unwittingly turned them into legends, their secrets dying with the last initiates. Today, all we have are fragments, a prayer etched on a lead tablet in Gaulish, a carved statue clutching a torque, the stubborn persistence of mistletoe in winter solstice traditions. The Druids' greatest spell might have been their disappearance, leaving us forever chasing shadows of the knowledge they swore never to write down. To the Celts, death was never an end. It was merely a doorway into Anon, Tir na and Og, or any of the countless names they gave to the otherworld. This wasn't some distant heaven or fiery underworld, but a parallel realm shimmering just beyond the edges of human perception, a place where time flowed backward, rivers ran with wine, and warriors feasted forever in halls of gold. Unlike the grim afterlives of other ancient cultures, the Celtic otherworld pulsed with life, a land of perpetual twilight where sickness and age held no power. Heroes like Cu Chulainn crossed into it through hidden mounds or sudden mists, returning with gifts of prophecy or curses woven from fairy magic. The otherworld wasn't just a mythic backdrop, it shaped how the Celts lived. Their festivals, particularly Samhain, marked moments when the veil between worlds grew thin. On that night, now echoed in our Halloween, spirits and ancestors walked freely among the living. Bonfires blazed not just for light, but as beacons to guide or repel unseen forces. Offerings of food were left at doorsteps, not out of fear, but from a profound belief that the dead could bless or blight the coming year. Even the famous Irish legend of the hero Oisin, who spent 300 years in Tir na and Og only to crumble to dust upon returning to mortal soil, wasn't just a tale, it was a warning about the peril of straddling two realms. Archaeology hints at how deeply this belief ran. Burial sites across Celtic lands show bodies laid to rest with weapons, jewelry, even chariots, not as mere status symbols, but as supplies for the journey ahead. Some graves align with solstice sunrises, as if the dead were being sent toward a specific celestial gateway. And then there are the so-called fairy forts, ringed earthworks still avoided by superstitious farmers today, said to be portals to that ageless realm. The Romans mocked these traditions, yet even their records admit Celtic warriors charged into battle without fear, convinced death was just a change of address. What's most striking is how the otherworld defied simple categorization. It could be a submerged city one day, a forest glade the next, sometimes a paradise, sometimes a trickster's maze. Druids spoke of it as a place of testing where souls faced trials before rebirth. This fluidity reveals a core truth: the Celts saw existence as a cycle, not a line. Their otherworld wasn't a reward or punishment, but a mirror reflecting the mysteries they couldn't, or didn't want to fully unravel. Even now, when autumn leaves twist in a sudden wind or a mist closes over a hilltop without warning, the old stories whisper that the veil is stirring again. The peat bogs of northern Europe hold secrets that time forgot, bodies so perfectly preserved that their fingernails, hairstyles, and even the last meals in their stomachs remain intact centuries later. These are the bog bodies, and their grim fate is entwined with the Celts' most unsettling rituals. Unlike typical burials, these victims were deliberately placed in wetlands, often with signs of violent deaths, broken bones, slit throats, or crushed skulls. One of the most famous, Tollund man, was found with a noose still around his neck, his face so serene he might have been sleeping. But this wasn't mere execution, it was sacrifice, a sacred act meant to bridge the human and divine. Why the bogs? To the Celts, these watery landscapes were liminal spaces, neither fully land nor water, where the boundary between worlds blurred. By offering lives there, they may have been feeding the gods themselves. Some theories suggest the victims were criminals or prisoners of war, given as payment for divine favors. Others point to their carefully arranged poses, like Lindo Man, placed face down with his limbs folded, as clues to ritual theater, reenacting myths of dying and rebirth. The bog's acidic, oxygen-poor environment acted as a natural preservative, but the Celts likely saw it as something more, a portal that swallowed offerings whole, delivering them directly to the otherworld. The details are chillingly precise. Forensic studies reveal many victims ate special meals before death, like gruel made from barley or mistletoe pollen, plants tied to Druidic rites. Some show signs of multiple injuries over time, hinting at prolonged ceremonies. And then there's the eerie fact that many were killed during seasonal festivals, particularly midwinter or harvest times. Were they gifts to ensure fertile crops or victory in battle? The Romans wrote of Celtic human sacrifice, but the bog bodies suggest a ritual far more nuanced than outright brutality. These weren't random acts of violence, they were calculated exchanges where life was currency and the gods demanded tribute. Yet the most haunting question lingers: who were these people? Some, like old Croghan man, wore finely crafted arm rings, marking them as nobility. His perfectly manicured hands suggest he never labored, yet his torso bears defensive wounds as if he fought to the end. Others, like Id Girl, a teenager with a lopsided spine, might have been chosen for their physical differences seen as touched by the divine. Each body tells a fractured story, a life cut short not out of cruelty, but from a belief that their deaths held cosmic weight. Today, as scientists peel back layers of peat and time, these silent witnesses force us to confront a truth about the Celts. Their spirituality was as complex as it was unforgiving, where salvation sometimes came at the edge of a blade. Beneath the rolling green hills of Britain and the riverbanks of Gaul, the Celts hid a glittering secret gold. Not just any gold, but masterpieces so finely wrought they rivaled the treasures of kings. Torques, those mysterious neck rings of twisted metal, gleamed with intricate patterns that seemed alive, their ends shaped like snarling beasts or coiled serpents. And then there were the coins, stamped with cryptic symbols and the faces of long-forgotten chieftains, scattered in hordes across Europe like breadcrumbs leading to a lost world. The Celts didn't just wear their wealth, they buried it with purpose, leaving behind puzzles we're still piecing together today. Take the Snettisham hoard, unearthed in Norfolk, England, a cache of over 150 gold torques, bracelets and ingots buried in the earth over 2,000 years ago. Some torques were so heavy they must have been ceremonial, never meant for daily wear, their weight a literal burden of power. But why hide such riches? The answer lies in the Celtic relationship with the divine. Gold wasn't just currency, it was a conduit to the gods, a metal believed to hold solar energy and sacred power. Burying it may have been an offering to ensure fertility, victory, or favor from the otherworld. Or perhaps in times of invasion, these hoards were emergency stashes, hidden with the hope of reclaiming them later, a hope that for many never came to pass. What's astonishing isn't just the quantity of gold, it's the skill behind it. Celtic smiths used techniques like filigree and granulation, weaving threads of gold into lace-like patterns or fusing tiny beads to create textures that caught the light like fire. Some torques were hollow, crafted with such precision they weighed little despite their size, a testament to artisans who understood metallurgy far beyond their time. The designs weren't random, they echoed the natural world's celestial swirls mimicking the stars, interlaced vines symbolizing the cycle of life. Even their coins, often dismissed as crude by early archaeologists, reveal hidden sophistication. Struck with dies bearing hidden messages or tribal emblems, they were less about commerce and more about propaganda, proclaiming the might of local rulers in a language only the initiated could read. But the real mystery, many hoards contain deliberately broken items, torques sliced in half, coins bent beyond use. Some scholars argue this was ritual killing of objects, releasing their spiritual essence as an offering. Others suggest it was a form of economic control, rendering wealth useless to thieves. Either way, each mutilated piece whispers of a culture that saw value beyond the material, where gold was both a physical and mystical currency. Modern discoveries continue to rewrite history. In 2019, a metal detectorist in Wales stumbled upon a torque so rare it redefined our understanding of Celtic trade routes. Its style matched artifacts from Switzerland, proving connections across vast distances. Then there's the enigmatic Broiter hoard from Ireland, featuring a model boat with golden oars, possibly an offering to Manannán mac Lir, the sea god. These finds don't just fill museum cases, they shatter old stereotypes of the Celts as primitive nomads. How could a people so scattered create such unified artistry unless they shared more than just battle cries, unless they were bound by something deeper? The buried gold of the Celts isn't just lost treasure. It's a language without words, a map of beliefs and alliances scribed in metal. Every hoard dug up is another page recovered from a book we're only beginning to read. And as long as the earth keeps yielding these golden secrets, the story of the Celts will keep glinting, half-buried, waiting for the next hand to brush away the dirt. The fiery warrior Queen Boudicca led one of the most devastating rebellions in Roman history, but her final act remains shrouded in silence. After her army's crushing defeat, the earth swallowed her. No grand tomb, no marked grave, not even a whisper of legend to point the way. The Romans, who documented her uprising in meticulous detail, suddenly go quiet when it comes to her death. Did she perish on the battlefield, her body lost in the carnage? Was she granted a secret burial by loyal followers, her resting place hidden to avoid desecration? Or did she, as some fringe theories suggest, slip away into myth, becoming one with the land she fought so fiercely to defend? Theories about her fate are as polarized as the queen herself. Tacitus, the primary Roman source, claims she took poison to avoid capture, a noble end befitting a leader who'd witnessed her daughters brutalized and her homeland pillaged. Yet other accounts imply her body was never recovered, leaving room for speculation. Modern archaeologists have scoured potential battle sites near Manchester or Anglesey, where the final clash may have occurred, but no grave aligns with her status. The absence is telling. In Celtic tradition, powerful leaders were often buried with their chariots, weapons, and treasures, objects that would have made her tomb unmistakable. That nothing has surfaced suggests deliberate concealment. The landscape itself holds clues. London's King's Cross station was once rumored to lie atop her burial mound, a story fueled by Victorian-era fascination but debunked by excavations. More compelling is the theory that her followers interred her in the sacred groves of East Anglia, where the Iceni tribe held spiritual authority. These groves, later razed by the Romans, would have erased any visible trace of her resting place. There's also the eerie possibility that her remains were scattered, a final act of rebellion denying Rome the satisfaction of displaying her bones as a trophy. Why does her missing tomb matter? Because Boudicca's story isn't just about loss, it's about resistance. Every empty field, every unmarked hill that could have held her bones is a testament to the Celts' refusal to let their enemies write the ending. Her invisibility mirrors the fate of her people, conquered but never truly erased. Even now, when a farmer's plow turns up an unusual artifact or a storm exposes a hidden ditch, there's a fleeting hope that the earth might finally yield its most defiant secret. Until then, Boudicca's tomb remains the ultimate unanswered challenge, a dare to history itself. Buried in a French field for centuries, the Coligny tablet emerged as one of the most startling windows into the Celtic mind, a fragmented bronze puzzle revealing how they measured time itself. Unearthed in 1897 near Lyon, this 5-foot-long relic isn't just a calendar. It's a testament to a civilization that harmonized the moon's dance with the sun's steadfast march. Imagine holding a piece of metal etched with 62 months' worth of markings, where each stroke wasn't just a date, but a heartbeat of ritual, harvest, and celestial prophecy. The Celts didn't merely track days, they orchestrated them, weaving time into the very fabric of their sacred and practical lives. What sets this system apart? While Rome marched to the rigid drum of a solar year, the Celts embraced a fluid interplay of lunar and solar cycles. Their calendar was a complex mosaic of luckful and unluckful months, marked by cryptic notations like mat, good, or annum, not good. Certain months like Samonios, which likely kicked off their new year around our modern November, were divided into two halves, reflecting a belief in time's duality. But here's the genius: every 2.5 years, they inserted an entire extra month to sync their lunar count with the solar seasons. This wasn't just math, it was alchemy, balancing the visible and invisible worlds. The tablet's precision is staggering. Symbols denote festivals like Beltane and Lugnasad, anchoring them to specific lunar phases. A tiny mark beside a date might signal the optimal moment to plant barley, while another could warn when the veil between worlds was thin enough for Druidic visions. Some sequences suggest intercalary days, blank spaces outside the monthly structure, possibly reserved for communal feasts or forbidden work. It's as if the Celts saw time as a living thing, its rhythm dictating when to wage war, when to wed, even when to dig a grave. Yet the Coligny calendar holds darker mysteries. Certain months are truncated, their days hollowed out like missing teeth. Scholars argue these gaps may mark periods of taboo, when normal activities cease to avert cosmic displeasure. The Romans, who later adopted parts of this system, stripped away its spiritual layers, turning what was once a sacred dialogue with the universe into a tool for taxes and troop movements. That shift reveals a chasm between cultures, one that measured time by harvests and sterisings, another by conquests and coin. The most haunting question lingers: who are the scribes behind this? The tablet's Gaulish inscriptions show Latin influence, hinting it was crafted under Roman occupation. A dying gasp of Celtic tradition encoded in the enemy's script. Was it a secret resistance preserving knowledge before the groves fell? Today, replicas of the Coligny tablet sit in museums, its brass surface gleaming under glass. But if you lean close past the numbers and glyphs, you can almost hear the whisper of druids counting not just days, but the pulse of eternity itself. Among the mist-laden hills and storm-tossed shores of the Celtic world, legends spoke of beings who defied the boundaries of flesh and form, the shapeshifters. These weren't mere monsters from fireside tales. They were mirrors of a culture that saw identity as fluid, where humans and animals shared souls as easily as they shared the same windswept landscapes. Take the puka, a creature as unpredictable as the weather, capable of shifting from a sleek black horse to a shaggy goat or even a shadow with glowing eyes. It wasn't just a trickster, it was a living lesson in the Celtic understanding of transformation, a reminder that nothing in this world was fixed, not even the body you wore. Then there were the Selkies, seals who could shed their skins to walk as humans on land, their stories whispered along the coasts of Ireland and Scotland. These tales weren't just romantic fables, they echoed a deeper truth about the Celts' bond with the natural world. To them, animals weren't just beasts, they were kin, guides, even ancestors. A Selkie's ability to slip between forms mirrored the Druidic belief in the soul's journey across lifetimes, where death was just another kind of shedding, another way to return to the sea or the sky. But shapeshifting wasn't always peaceful. Some legends warned of the Uis, a water horse that lured riders onto its back only to drag them into the depths. Beneath the horror lay a darker metaphor, the danger of losing oneself to unchecked desires or false faces. These stories served as cautionary tales, teaching listeners to discern truth from illusion in a world where appearances could lie. Even the Morrigan, the phantom queen of battle, was said to soar over battlefields as a crow, her shifts between woman and bird signaling the thin line between life and death. What's striking is how these myths blurred the lines between punishment and gift. A Selkie forced into marriage when her skin was stolen might pine for the sea, yet her children often inherited her duality, becoming healers or seers. The puka could ruin crops or bless them, depending on its mood, just like the land itself, which could nourish or starve. This duality wasn't contradiction, it was cosmology. The Celts saw existence as a tapestry of interwoven threads, where a single being could be predator and protector, human and beast, depending on the angle of the light. Archaeology hints at how deeply these beliefs ran. Carvings of horned gods like Cernunnos, seated cross-legged with antlers crowning his head, suggest rituals where worshippers may have donned animal skins to channel their power. Even the fierce wolf warriors of Celtic lore who fought in frenzied trances were said to carry the spirit of the beast into battle. These weren't superstitions, they were spiritual technologies, ways to harness the wildness within and beyond. Today, remnants of these beliefs linger where you'd least expect them. In rural Ireland, some still refuse to kill a spider, fearing it might be a puka in disguise. Fishermen in the Hebrides toss coins into the waves, a silent apology to the Celts for disturbing their waters. These aren't just old wives' tales, they're the last echoes of a worldview where identity was a cloak, not a cage, and the boundaries between worlds were as porous as the morning mist. The shapeshifters may be myth, but the truth they carried, that we are all more than what we seem, still whispers in the bones of the land. Imagine standing on a mist-shrouded battlefield 2,000 years ago, the air thick with anticipation, when suddenly an unearthly shriek splits the silence, rising like the scream of some primordial beast. That sound wasn't born of nature. It was the cry of the carnyx, the Celts' most terrifying weapon long before blades ever clashed. Towering over 6 feet tall with a boar's head mounted atop its bronze tube, this war trumpet didn't just signal attack, it rewired the minds of those who heard it. Classical historians like Diodorus Siculus wrote of its harsh, percussive roar, designed to mimic the dying squeals of a wild boar, a sound so visceral it sent Roman soldiers scrambling before the first arrow flew. But the carnyx was more than noise, it was a masterpiece of psychological engineering. Recent reconstructions by archaeologists and musicians reveal its chilling versatility. Played vertically like a serpentine megaphone, its sound could carry over miles, bouncing off hills to create the illusion of an army far larger than reality. The boar's head wasn't just ornamentation. Its hinged jaw allowed it to snap in rhythm with the notes, adding a visual horror to the auditory assault. And the metal's unique alloy, analysis of fragments found at the Tintignac Sanctuary in France, shows it was deliberately mixed to produce dissonant harmonics frequencies that trigger primal fear responses in the human brain. The genius of the carnyx lay in its duality. By day, it might rally Celtic warriors with rhythmic calls timed to their heartbeat. By night, its rasping wails became ghostly, convincing enemies the woods themselves had come alive with monsters. When Julius Caesar described the Gauls' infernal chorus during his campaigns, he wasn't exaggerating. A 2018 study had modern volunteers listen to a reconstructed carnyx while monitoring brain activity. Their stress hormones spiked within seconds, proving its effect wasn't just ancient propaganda. Perhaps most fascinating is how the carnyx mirrored Celtic values. Boars symbolized courage and ferocity in their culture, their images adorning helmets and shields. To wield this instrument wasn't just tactical, it was spiritual, channeling the beast's soul into battle. Recent digs in Scotland uncovered fragments near ritual sites, suggesting some were consecrated by Druids, their sound believed to summon divine wrath. Today, hearing a reconstructed carnyx played as in the British Museum's haunting demonstrations is like stepping through time. That same metallic shriek once echoed across the fields of Alesia and the shores of Anglesey, a sound so potent it didn't just frighten enemies, it defined the Celts themselves. And in its lingering echo, we catch a glimpse of a people who understood war wasn't just fought with steel, but with the raw power of sound itself. The island of Unis Mon, known today as Anglesey, wasn't just another Celtic settlement. It was the beating heart of Druidic power, a place so sacred that even the Romans spoke of it in hushed tones as the Isle of the Powerful. Picture a windswept landscape dotted with stone circles and sacred groves, where the Druids gathered to conduct rituals so secret that no outsider was permitted to witness them. This was the last unconquered bastion of Celtic spirituality, a stronghold that held out against Rome's relentless advance until the year 60, when General Suetonius Paulinus crossed the Menai Strait with one goal: erase it from history. What made Unis Mon so vital? For centuries it had been a sanctuary for knowledge and resistance. The Druids here weren't just priests, they were the keepers of laws, the arbiters of justice, and the spiritual leaders who united tribes across Britain. The island's isolation made it a perfect refuge, accessible only by boat, its shores guarded by treacherous tides. Classical writers describe it as a place of impenetrable oak forests and lakes that mirrored the stars, where Druids trained for 20 years to memorize every hymn, every prophecy, every incantation. But its real power lay beneath the surface. Recent excavations have uncovered ritual pits filled with votive offerings, carved wooden figures, cauldrons brimming with animal bones, even human remains hinting at ceremonies meant to bind the island's magic to the land itself. Rome's assault on Unis Mon wasn't just a military campaign, it was cultural annihilation. Tacitus recounts the scene with grim clarity. Roman soldiers cutting down sacred groves, torching temples, and slaughtering Druids mid-chant, their robes still smoldering from sacrificial fires. The massacre was so thorough that the island's name faded from Roman records for decades. But archaeology tells a subtler story. Burned post holes and charred grain stores prove the destruction was systematic, yet hidden among the rubble are clues the Romans missed. A child's leather shoe tucked beneath a hearthstone, a twisted silver torque buried upright as if planted like a seed. These weren't accidents, they were acts of defiance, quiet promises that the old ways wouldn't die. The most haunting discovery, a series of underground chambers near Lyn Cerrig Bach, where metalworkers once forged weapons and ritual objects. The site was abandoned in haste. Half-finished swords still lie in the mud, alongside molds for casting the very torques Rome sought to melt down. But here's the mystery. Many of these artifacts show signs of deliberate damage before being tossed into the lake. Were they offerings to the gods, a final plea for protection? Or were the Druids ensuring their secrets wouldn't fall into enemy hands? Today, Anglesey's landscape whispers of what was lost. The remains of a circular hut village at Bryn Celli, they align with the summer solstice sunrise, its entrance framing the first light like a doorway. Nearby, a carved stone shows a serpent swallowing its tail, an Ouroboros symbol of eternity. Even the local folklore carries echoes. Farmers still speak of the old ones who linger near certain groves, and fishermen avoid pulling nets too close to Lyn Cerrig Bach, fearing what might rise with them. The Romans may have razed Unis Mon cities, but they couldn't erase its soul. Every rusted spearhead, every scorched post hole is a reminder. Some things are built to endure, even when their names are forgotten. Fire blazed across the hills of the Celtic world every spring as the festival of Beltane ignited, a celebration so potent its embers still glow in modern traditions. This wasn't just a seasonal marker, it was a cosmic wedding, the moment when the earth and sky were believed to unite in a sacred marriage. As winter's grip loosened, communities gathered to light twin bonfires on hilltops, their flames licking the darkness while cattle were driven between them in a purification ritual. The smoke carried prayers for fertile fields and healthy herds, but the deeper magic lay in the symbolism, fire as the spark of life bridging the human and divine. The maypole, now a quaint relic in some village fairs, held far older secrets. Its phallic shape plunged into the earth wasn't just folk whimsy. It mirrored the Celts' unflinching reverence for creation's raw energy. Dancers wove ribbons in spirals down the pole, a visual incantation binding the community's fate to the land's fertility. Young couples slipped into the woods after dark, their unions blessed by the same forces that made crops sprout and rivers swell. Even the dew collected on Beltane morning was thought to hold enchantments, with women bathing their faces in it for beauty or pouring it over doorways as protection. What made Beltane so dangerous in Roman eyes was its untamed vitality. While Rome's festivals honored emperors and military victories, here was a holiday that celebrated the unruly power of nature itself. Druids presided over ceremonies where oatcakes baked with dark marks were broken and distributed. Whoever drew the charred piece became the symbolic sacrifice, enduring mock death to ensure the tribe's prosperity. Some scholars argue this ritual echoes older, grimmer practices lost to time, softened into theatre as Christianity spread, yet Beltane never truly died. Its fires still leap in Edinburgh's annual celebration, where modern pagans and curious onlookers circle flames just as their ancestors did. In Ireland, homeowners hang yellow flowers, echoes of the sun worship woven into the festival, while Cornwall's Ogham parade twists through streets, its hobbyhorse dancer a spectral remnant of ancient animal disguises. Even the word May Day carries hidden threads of the past tied to cries for help that once summoned the community's protective spirits. The genius of Beltane was its duality, a party with teeth, a fertility rite wrapped in revelry. Its legacy lingers wherever spring is greeted not just with planting but with passion, a reminder that the Celts saw the world not as a machine to be controlled, but as a living thing to be courted, feared, and joyously celebrated. The fires may have dimmed, but their light still dances in the blood of those who feel the old rhythms of the earth. To swear an oath in the Celtic world was not to simply give your word, it was to weave your very soul into the fabric of fate. Among warriors, the most sacred vows were sealed not with ink, but with blood, a practice so binding that breaking one meant courting supernatural ruin. These weren't mere promises, they were cosmic contracts etched into existence with the same solemnity as the Druids' incantations. Picture a chieftain and his warriors gathered in the flickering light of a torchlit hall, their blades drawn. As the oath was spoken, each man would slice his forearm, letting crimson droplets fall into a shared vessel, often a ceremonial cauldron or the soil itself. The act transformed words into something living, an unbreakable thread tying the swearer not just to his comrades but to the gods who witnessed it. The power of these oaths lay in their consequences. Ancient Irish texts like the Ulster Cycle describe warriors who'd rather face death than dishonor a blood vow. In one tale, the hero Cú Chulainn, bound by an oath to defend Ulster, single-handedly holds off an army despite his body failing him, because to retreat would unravel the very fabric of his identity. This wasn't hyperbole. The Celts believed breaking a blood oath invited a curse called the Fur-Flathiman, the ruler's truth, where the land itself would revolt against the oath breaker. Crops would wither, rivers would flood, and the offender's name would become synonymous with betrayal. Even the Romans, no strangers to brutal discipline, noted how Celtic warriors would endure torture rather than violate these pacts. But the rituals varied in their symbolism. Some oaths were sworn over weapons, binding a warrior to his sword as closely as to his kin. Others involved passing through the arched spears of one's tribe, a physical threshold marking the passage from ordinary life to sworn duty. The most chilling were the Jisa, personal taboos woven into blood oaths like a prohibition against refusing hospitality or eating a certain animal. Violating one's jays wasn't just dishonorable, it was an unraveling of destiny, often foretelling doom. Queen Boudicca of Connacht, for instance, met her end after ignoring a jays that forbade her from bathing in a specific lake, proving how deeply these vows intertwined with cosmic order. What's striking is how these oaths functioned as social glue. In a world without centralized governments, blood oaths ensured loyalty when laws couldn't. A chieftain's authority relied less on force than on the web of oaths binding his warriors to him. Even disputes between tribes were often settled not by battle, but by sworn compacts witnessed by Druids, their penalties so severe that adherence became the only rational choice. Modern legal scholars compare them to early contractual systems, where the fear of divine retribution replaced written enforcement, yet traces of this tradition linger. In parts of Scotland, fishermen still spit into their palms before sealing a deal, a faint echo of those ancient blood minglings. And in Ireland's rugged landscapes, locals might point to weather-worn standing stones where clans once swore allegiance, their names lost but their promises still heavy in the air. The Celts understood something we've largely forgotten, that words alone are fragile, but words fused with blood become unbreakable. Their oaths weren't just agreements, they were spells, casting loyalty into the very bones of those who swore them. And in a world where honor was the only currency that truly mattered, that was enough to move mountains or topple kings, carved into weathered standing stones scattered across Scotland's rugged landscape, the symbols of the Picts defy easy explanation. These intricate designs, from crescents and Z-rods to beasts with coiled tails, aren't mere decoration. They're a riddle wrapped in a mystery left behind by a people so elusive even their name, Picti, was given to them by the Romans, meaning the painted ones. What secrets do these symbols hold? Theories abound, but one thing's certain. The Picts crafted a visual language that refused to fade, even as their kingdom vanished into the mists of history. Take the famous Abelemno stone, its surface etched with a battle scene flanked by cryptic icons. The crescent and V-rod motif appears repeatedly across Pictish artifacts, its meaning hotly debated. Some archaeologists argue it represents a broken spear or shield, a warrior's badge of honor. Others see celestial patterns, suggesting the crescent mirrors the moon's phases while the rod tracks its path across the night sky. Then there's the mysterious Pictish beast, a dolphin-like creature with eagle's talons, often paired with mirrors and combs. Could it symbolize a water deity or perhaps a clan's mythical ancestor? The truth may lie in the context. Many symbol stones mark burial sites, their carvings acting as both memorial and map, directions for the soul's journey to the otherworld. But the most tantalizing clue emerged in 2019, when researchers using 3D scanning discovered previously invisible symbols hidden by centuries of weathering. These faint markings revealed patterns aligning with solstice sunrises, hinting that some stones served as ancient calendars or ritual markers. Even more intriguing, certain symbols appear exclusively near royal sites like Burgard Fort, suggesting they functioned as royal insignias, the medieval heraldry of their day. The Picts may have left no written records, but their stones whisper of a society with a sophisticated grasp of both art and astronomy. Yet the greatest enigma isn't the symbols themselves, it's why they abruptly vanish after the 8th century. As Christianity spread, crosses began overshadowing the old icons, blending Celtic knots with pagan motifs in a cultural compromise. Some scholars believe the symbols evolved into the intricate knotwork of illuminated manuscripts like the Book of Kells, their original meanings encrypted for posterity. Others contend they were actively suppressed, their power too threatening to the new order. Today, standing before a Pictish stone is like holding a mirror to a half-remembered dream. The symbols resist straightforward translation, yet their persistence, on coastal cliffs, in churchyards, even repurposed as bridge stones, proves their creators intended them to endure. Perhaps they were never meant to be read as we understand language, but felt, a tactile bridge between worlds where every curve and line pulsed with stories we're only beginning to imagine. Ancient Druids didn't just see trees as pillars of the forest, they saw them as living alphabets, each species whispering its own secret message to those who knew how to listen. This was the essence of the Celtic tree alphabet, where every letter in the Ogham script pulsed with the energy of a sacred tree, from the mighty oak to the poisonous yew. Unlike modern alphabets divorced from nature, this system wove language and landscape together, turning groves into libraries and bark into pages. The letter D, or Dur, wasn't just a symbol, it was the oak itself, king of the forest, its name echoing the Proto-Celtic word for doorway, a nod to its role as a portal to wisdom. Each tree in this alphabet carried layers of meaning beyond its wood. The birch or beech marked the first Ogham character, symbolizing new beginnings. Its pale bark was used to craft protective cradles for infants, while its branches swept away bad luck in purification rites. Contrast this with the yew Ioho, whose Ogham stroke resembles its needle-like leaves. Ancient yew groves often circled burial sites, their toxic berries and immortality defying growth, some live over 2,000 years, making them emblems of death and rebirth. Even the humble willow sail had its role. Its association with lunar cycles and water made it a favorite for druids crafting charms to reveal hidden truths. But this wasn't merely poetry, it was practical mysticism. The tree alphabet functioned as a divination tool centuries before tarot cards existed. Druids would carve Ogham staves from their corresponding trees, casting them like runes to read fate's patterns. A tin holly stave landing upright might signal impending victory in battle, its evergreen spines mirroring a warrior's resilience. Meanwhile, Col hazel often appeared in fertility rites, its nuts believed to hold concentrated wisdom, an echo of the myth where salmon gained knowledge by eating hazelnuts falling into sacred pools. Archaeology hints at how deeply this arboreal code ran. At the Uisneach Hill in Ireland, a site called the Navel of the Land, excavations revealed post holes arranged in Ogham-like patterns, suggesting ritual spaces mirrored the tree alphabet structure. Even the Cad Godu, a cryptic Welsh battle poem, describes warriors transforming into trees mid-fight, a metaphor perhaps for invoking their symbolic powers. Modern eyes might dismiss this as superstition, but the Celts recognized what science now confirms. Trees communicate not with words but through root networks and chemical signals. Their alphabet wasn't just naming nature, it was listening to it. Today, remnants linger where you'd least expect. The Irish word for letter, litir, still echoes Lewis Rowan, a tree once carved with protective spells. And in quiet corners of Cornwall, some hedgerows still follow old Ogham sequences, their species planted centuries ago as living prayers. To trace your finger along an Ogham stone is to touch more than grooves in rockets, to brush against a worldview where language wasn't imposed upon the earth but drawn from its veins. The next time you stand beneath an oak's canopy or snap a hazel twig, remember, you're not just in a forest, you're walking through a forgotten scripture, its verses written in leaf and bark, waiting to be read anew. The Romans wrote of pirates who stalked the waves beyond their reach, sailors who wielded storms as weapons and built ships that laughed at the Mediterranean's calm waters. These weren't the corsairs of later centuries, but the forgotten Celtic sea wolves of the Atlantic, tribes like the Veneti, whose mastery of the ocean made them the Vikings of their age. Picture a fleet of vessels unlike anything Rome had seen, their hulls crafted from massive oak planks lashed together with iron nails as thick as a man's thumb. These weren't just boats, they were floating fortresses, towering over Roman galleys with hulls so sturdy they could ram through waves that would splinter lesser ships. Julius Caesar himself, no stranger to naval warfare, called them the most powerful seafarers in Gaul, a grudging admission from a man who nearly lost his conquest to their defiance. What set the Veneti apart was their symbiotic relationship with the sea. Their ships had no need for oars. Instead, they harnessed the wind with leather sails so thick they could withstand gales that shredded Roman canvas. The design was revolutionary, high prows to cleave through Atlantic swells, flat keels to glide effortlessly over shoals where enemy ships ran aground. But the real genius lay in their navigation. While Mediterranean sailors clung to coastlines, the Veneti read the stars, tides, and even the flight patterns of seabirds to traverse open waters. Their raids stretched from Brittany to the British Isles, a network of plunder and trade so vast it rivaled Rome's own supply routes. The Veneti's downfall came from their own innovation. When Caesar besieged their coastal strongholds in 56 BCE, he found himself outmatched at sea until he resorted to a brutal tactic, cutting down the rigging of Celtic ships with hooked poles, rendering their sails useless. Without mobility, the Veneti's floating castles became sitting targets, and Rome's legions overwhelmed them. Yet even in defeat, their legacy endured. Archaeologists studying shipwrecks off the French coast discovered Veneti-style nails in Ireland, proving their influence outlasted their empire. But the Veneti were just one thread in a broader tapestry of Celtic piracy. Across the Irish Sea, the Scoti raiders preyed on Roman Britain's western shores. Their currach hide-covered boats light enough to portage, darting in and out of coves faster than triremes could pursue. Further south, the Iberian Celts used their knowledge of treacherous currents to ambush Phoenician traders, vanishing into fog banks like ghosts. These weren't mindless marauders, they were opportunists who turned the Atlantic's fury into an ally. The most tantalizing clue to their reach lies in a single artifact, a Celtic torque dredged from the seabed near the Azores, far beyond where ancient maps suggested they sailed. Could the Celts have ventured even farther, their ships riding the Gulf Stream to lands history forgot? We may never know for certain, but the waves they once ruled still whisper their names not as barbarians, but as the undisputed lords of the wild, untamed ocean. Rising from the rolling green plains of County Meath, the hill of Tara doesn't just dominate the landscape, it haunts it. For over 5,000 years, this low, grassy hill has been the beating heart of Ireland's spiritual and political life, a place where kings were crowned, gods were invoked, and the veil between worlds wore thin. But beneath its tranquil surface lies a darker truth. Tara is a cursed place steeped in blood and prophecy, where even modern attempts to unravel its secrets have sparked controversy and unrest. At first glance, Tara seems unassuming, a series of gentle earthworks and stone circles scattered across a windswept ridge. But these markings are just the surface of a far deeper mystery. The Lia Fail, or Stone of Destiny, stands as the hill's eerie centerpiece. Legend claims this weathered pillar shrieked when touched by the rightful High King of Ireland, its cry echoing across the land to confirm his divine mandate. But the stone holds another, grimmer tale. Ancient texts speak of kings who died within hours of their coronation here, their reigns cut short by some unseen force. Was it coincidence, or had the gods, or something older, marked Tara as a place where power came at a price? The hill's true power lies in its role as a cosmic axis. Archaeologists have uncovered a labyrinth of underground passages aligned with solstice sunrises, while magnetic surveys reveal hidden timber structures buried beneath the soil. To the Celts, Tara wasn't just a royal seat, it was a temenos, a sacred meeting point between earth and sky. The Druids called it Team Hair, meaning place of great view, but some scholars argue the name shares roots with words for portal or threshold. This wasn't metaphor. Tara's rituals often involved symbolic marriages between kings and the land itself, a union sealed with ceremonies that may have included human sacrifice. Bones found in nearby trenches show signs of deliberate, ritualistic fractures victims offered to appease the Otherworld's capricious guardians, yet the hill's curse extends into the modern era. In the early 2000s, plans to build a motorway near Tara ignited furious protests. Preservationists warned that disturbing the land would unleash its dormant wrath, citing Ireland's long tradition of Gisa taboos tied to sacred sites. When construction began anyway, workers reported eerie malfunctions, machinery failing without cause, survey equipment giving false readings. Then came the accidents. One laborer swore he'd seen shadowy figures moving through the mist at dawn, their shapes vanishing when approached. Whether supernatural or psychological, the effect was real enough to delay the project for months. Today, Tara remains a place of potent duality. Pilgrims still gather at Samhain, believing the hill's energy peaks as the year turns. New Age seekers meditate atop the ancient mounds, while archaeologists armed with ground-penetrating radar quietly map the hill's hidden chambers. But locals tell visitors one rule above all: respect the silence. Tara listens, and those who take without giving, who seek its secrets without honoring its weight, may find themselves caught in a story far older and far darker than they bargained for. The wind that sweeps across its grasses carries more than weather, it carries whispers, and the hill, patient as the centuries, keeps its curses ready. Long before Bram Stoker's Dracula stalked the night, the Celts whispered of creatures far older beings who defied death not with fangs, but with curses carved into their very bones. At the heart of these legends stood the Deag Dhu, Ireland's answer to the vampire, a figure as tragic as she was terrifying. Her story begins not with monstrosity, but with betrayal, a beautiful woman forced into a loveless marriage, her heart broken until death claimed her. But her rest was anything but peaceful. Rising from the grave, she became the red blood-sucker, her pallid skin flushed with stolen life as she sought vengeance on the living. Unlike the aristocratic vampires of later lore, the Deag Dhu was a creature of raw emotion, grief, and rage given flesh, her hunger for blood inseparable from her hunger for justice. The Celts didn't fear these revenants out of superstition alone. Their existence mirrored a deeper belief that some souls were too powerful, too wronged to stay buried. In Ireland, graves were sometimes sealed with heavy stones, not to keep grave robbers out, but to keep the dead in. The Deag Dhu wasn't an anomaly, she was part of a broader spectral ecology. Across Wales, the Gerach Y ribbon lurked in riverbanks, her shrieks heralding death, while Scottish tales warned of the Beoban Sith, a vampiric fairy who danced men to exhaustion before draining them. These weren't mindless predators, they were entities bound by rules, their horrors echoing the moral codes of the cultures that birthed them. What set Celtic vampire myths apart was their intimacy. The Deag Dhu didn't prey on strangers, she targeted her own family, her former village, weaving her vengeance into the fabric of communal memory. Her power came from the very bonds that once defined her humanity. Folk remedies against her were equally personal, scattering oats on her grave to keep her occupied counting them, or piling cairns over burial sites to weigh down restless spirits. Even the act of blood drinking held symbolic weight. To the Celts, blood wasn't just life, it was lineage, the literal and spiritual tie between generations. A creature that consumed it wasn't merely feeding, it was unraveling kinship itself. Archaeology hints at how seriously these beliefs were taken. Excavations of early medieval Irish cemeteries reveal skeletons buried face down, their mouths stuffed with stones, a clear effort to prevent the dead from rising. Some graves show signs of deliberate mutilation, femurs broken, skulls separated from spines. These weren't random acts of desecration, they were calculated defenses against whatever lurked in the otherworld's shadows. Even the placement of burial sites mattered. Many were tucked into the edges of settlements, close enough to watch over the living but far enough to keep their hunger at bay. The most chilling aspect of these myths, their persistence. Long after Christianity reached Celtic lands, the Deag Dhu endured, her story merging with saints' tales and penitent ghosts. In Kerry, locals still avoid certain ruined chapels at dusk, claiming they're waiting places for the restless dead. Modern writers like Sheridan Le Fanu wove these legends into Gothic fiction, but the original tales carried a rawness later versions lacked. The Deag Dhu wasn't a seductive aristocrat, she was a village girl with dirt under her nails and a scream that never faded. To understand these stories is to glimpse the Celtic view of death not as an end, but as a threshold some souls refuse to cross. The Deag Dhu and her kin weren't monsters, they were warnings. In a world where justice was fragile and honor was everything, the dead might return not to terrify but to remind the living, some debts can't be buried. Even now, when the wind howls through abandoned churchyards or a shadow moves where no shadow should be, the old fears stir. Because the Celts knew something we've tried to forget, that the past never really dies. It just learns to hunt in silence. The path to becoming a druid was not for the faint of heart. It demanded not just years of study, but a transformation of body, mind, and soul. Ancient texts whisper of initiation rituals so extreme they bordered on the supernatural, trials designed to strip away the mundane and awaken the initiate to the hidden currents of the world. Imagine a young apprentice, blindfolded and barefoot, led deep into a sacred grove where the trees themselves seemed to watch. Here, in the heart of the wilderness, the real training began. Fasting for days under the open sky, drinking only water infused with hallucinogenic herbs, the candidate would teeter on the edge of delirium, their senses sharpened to a razor's edge. This wasn't mere endurance, it was a deliberate unraveling, a dismantling of the ordinary self to make room for the divine. One of the most haunting accounts comes from Roman historian Pliny the Elder, who described a ritual involving the golden sickle and the sacred mistletoe. The initiate, clad in white robes, would climb an oak tree at the precise moment of the full moon, cutting the mistletoe with a blade that never touched the earth. The plant, believed to hold the essence of the gods, was caught in a linen cloth before it could be contaminated by the ground's profanity, but the true test came after. The candidate was then sealed in a dark pit for 3 days and nights, left with only the mistletoe and their own thoughts, a symbolic death and rebirth echoing the cycles of nature they sought to master. Other fragments hint at even more visceral trials. Some sources speak of the ordeal of the 4 elements, where initiates faced fire, water, earth, and air in succession. Hands might be held over sacred flames until blisters formed, not as punishment, but to prove one's resolve to channel the gods' fiery wisdom. Next came immersion in icy streams, their bodies submerged until breath became a distant memory, a test of surrender to the unseen forces of the otherworld. Then, buried up to the neck in soil, they would listen for the heartbeat of the land, learning to distinguish its rhythms from their own. Finally, they stood atop windswept cliffs, arms outstretched as gales threatened to hurl them into the abyss, a final lesson in trust and balance. But the most enigmatic rite of all was the vision quest. Stripped of all possessions, the initiate was abandoned in a remote forest with a single instruction: return only when the spirits had spoken. Days turned to weeks as hunger and isolation warped reality. Shadows took on voices, animals became messengers, some never returned, vanishing into the wild like whispers. Those who did emerge carried a new light behind their eyes, their tongues fluent in the language of omens. Archaeologists have uncovered small, isolated huts in bogs and deep woodlands, possible remnants of these solitary vigils, their floors littered with the bones of sacrificed animals and charred seeds of vision-inducing plants. What's startling is how closely these rituals mirror shamanic traditions across the globe, from the sweat lodges of the Americas to the dream walks of the Siberian tundra. The Druids, like all true mystics, understood that wisdom couldn't be taught, it had to be earned, often through terror and ecstasy. Their initiations weren't just ceremonies, they were surgeries of the soul, excising doubt and fear to make room for the raw, unfiltered knowledge of the unseen. Today, modern Druidic revivalists attempt to reconstruct these rites, though none can say how closely they mirror the originals. The old groves are gone, and with them, the unbroken chain of whispered lore. Yet the land remembers. In certain hollows of Wales or along the misty ridges of the Scottish Highlands, travelers still report strange encounters. A pressure in the air before a storm, the sudden clarity of a bird's call, as if the earth itself is testing those who dare to listen. The Druids may be dust, but their trials linger, etched into the wind and the water, waiting for the next worthy apprentice to step forward. Standing stones have long been the silent sentinels of the Celtic world, but among them, the Beltany stone circle in Donegal, Ireland, holds secrets that defy simple explanations. Unlike the more famous Stonehenge, Beltany's 44 weathered monoliths form a rough but deliberate ring atop a hill, their uneven heights and spacing suggesting a purpose beyond mere monument. When archaeologists mapped the site, they discovered something startling. The stones align not just with solstice sunrises, but with the movements of the moon and stars in ways that mirror ancient agricultural cycles. This wasn't just a calendar, it was a celestial engine designed to harness the rhythms of the cosmos for rituals lost to time. The precision of Beltany's alignments is no accident. On the morning of the summer solstice, the sun rises directly over a distinctive notch in the distant hills, its light striking a single stone at the circle's eastern edge. But the real mystery lies in its lunar connections. Certain stones frame the moon's most extreme northern and southern positions during its 18.6-year cycle, a phenomenon known as the lunar standstill. Only cultures with advanced astronomical knowledge could track this subtle dance of the heavens, yet the Celts left no written records of such expertise. How did they encode this wisdom into stone? The answer may lie in the landscape itself. Beltany's hilltop position creates a natural horizon calendar, where the rising and setting of celestial bodies align with specific peaks and valleys, turning the entire surrounding terrain into a giant observatory. But Beltany's purpose wasn't purely scientific. Excavations have uncovered charred bones, shattered pottery, and fragments of cremated human remains within the circle, pointing to ceremonies where the living communed with ancestors under the watch of the stars. The arrangement of certain stones mirrors constellations significant in Celtic myth, like the Corona Borealis, which some scholars link to tales of the Otherworld. Even the name Beltany whispers of its ritual past, likely derived from Beltane, the fiery festival marking summer's arrival. Imagine the scene: druids cloaked in animal skins, chanting as dawn's first light crept between the stones, their voices weaving the movements of the heavens into the fabric of daily life. What makes Beltany truly remarkable is its individuality. While many stone circles follow strict geometric patterns, Beltany's asymmetrical design suggests it evolved over centuries, with stones added or shifted to reflect changing beliefs or new astronomical insights. Some slabs bear faint carvings of spirals and cup marks, symbols found in Neolithic tombs millennia older than the Celts. This hints at a sacred site so potent that successive cultures felt compelled to claim it, each adding their own layer of meaning. Modern astronomers using 3D modeling have even identified potential sightlines to other distant circles, raising the tantalizing possibility that Beltany was part of a vast network of linked observatories, each functioning as a node in a spiritual and scientific web stretching across the land. The stones themselves guard their last secrets fiercely. Unlike the quarried slabs of Stonehenge, Beltany's monoliths were gathered locally, their varied geology subtly reflecting the diversity of the Earth's crust. Some contain veins of quartz that glitter under certain light conditions, possibly used to amplify torchlight during nocturnal ceremonies. Others resonate when struck, producing low, haunting tones that may have accompanied rituals. The most enigmatic stone lies fallen near the center, its surface pitted with unnatural grooves, perhaps an ancient altar or a Druidic speaking stone where voices echoed with uncanny clarity. Today, standing in Beltany's center as the wind howls through the gaps between stones, it's impossible not to feel the weight of that lost knowledge. The circle's genius wasn't just in tracking time, but in collapsing it, making the celestial intimate, the cosmic personal. Every alignment, every weathered carving was a dialogue between earth and sky, a prayer etched in stone. And as the modern world rediscovers these alignments, we're left with a humbling truth. The Celts didn't just observe the heavens, they listened to them. Roman legions marching into Celtic lands expected barbarian hordes, but what they encountered on the battlefield was something far more terrifying. Thundering war chariots, their wheels spitting mud and their drivers screaming curses as they carved through disciplined ranks like a scythe through wheat. These weren't the heavy, lumbering chariots of the ancient Near East. They were sleek, deadly machines engineered for speed and shock. Picture a lightweight wooden frame balanced on iron-rimmed wheels, drawn by two horses bred for stamina and nerve. The chariot's secret lay in its flexibility, its axle groaned with an ingenious suspension system of leather straps, allowing it to pivot sharply even at full gallop. A skilled driver could whip the rig in a tight circle, giving his warrior a split second to hurl a spear, swing a sword, or leap onto an enemy's back before darting away like a hornet. But the true genius of Celtic chariots wasn't just their engineering, it was their tactics. Unlike the Romans, who valued rigid formations, the Celts treated chariots as mobile platforms for psychological warfare. Before battle, drivers would race along enemy lines, their warriors standing tall to shout insults or sing war chants, their painted bodies and shimmering torques designed to unsettle. Then came the faint, sudden charges followed by abrupt retreats, luring opponents into broken ground where hidden infantry waited. Julius Caesar, facing them in Gaul, grudgingly admitted their effectiveness, noting how chariots could advance, retreat, and turn with astonishing speed. Some accounts describe warriors deliberately driving chariots into Roman shield walls, leaping free at the last moment to send the unmanned vehicles careening into the ranks like battering rams. Yet for all their brilliance, Celtic chariots vanished from the battlefield within a few generations. The reason? Adaptation. Rome's legions quickly learned to counter them by planting caltrops, spiked metal traps in their path, or using pilum javelins to pin drivers to their rigs. More crucially, the Celts themselves began to adopt cavalry after contact with Germanic tribes, finding horses alone were faster and cheaper to maintain without sacrificing mobility. But the deepest blow came from shifting warfare itself. As battles moved from open fields to fortified towns and forests, the chariot's greatest strength, its speed on flat terrain, became a liability. The last echoes of this lost art survive in unlikely places. Irish myths brim with chariot duels, like the legendary hero Cu Chulain's single-handed defense of Ulster from a moving rig. Archaeologists have unearthed chariot burials from Yorkshire to Burgundy, their rusted iron wheels and horse skeletons still arranged as if ready to charge into the otherworld. And in 2012, a reconstructed Celtic chariot proved its mettle in modern tests, outmaneuvering mounted riders in tight turns. These weren't just vehicles, they were extensions of the warrior's body, a fleeting marriage of human fury and mechanical grace. Their disappearance marks more than a tactical shift. It's the silent end of a way of war where spectacle and skill mattered as much as slaughter. The Romans may have erased the chariots from history, but for a brief, blazing moment, they made the mightiest empire on earth feel the sting of the underdog's wheels. Beneath the glassy surfaces of lakes and rivers across the Celtic world lie sanctuaries untouched by time, places where the boundary between the earthly and the divine dissolved into the depths. One of the most haunting examples is Llyn Cerrig Bach, a tranquil lake in Wales that gave up its secrets during World War II, when workers draining peat uncovered a trove of artifacts that should never have been there. Spearheads bent at unnatural angles, broken swords twisted into knots, chariot fittings and slave chains, all deliberately mangled before being cast into the water. These weren't lost items, they were offerings carefully selected and ritually killed to release their spiritual essence into the liquid embrace of the otherworld. The Celts saw water differently than we do today. To them, lakes, rivers, and bogs weren't just resources, they were living gateways to the divine, places where the gods whispered through ripples and currents. Depositing valuables into these waters wasn't an act of disposal. It was a transaction, a sacred trade where material wealth was exchanged for supernatural favor. At Llyn Cerrig Bach, the sheer variety of objects from fine bronze mirrors to gruesome slave collars suggests rituals spanning centuries, possibly tied to moments of crisis or triumph. A victorious chieftain might sacrifice captured weapons to thank the gods, while a community facing famine could offer precious cauldrons in desperation. The deliberate destruction of these items held profound meaning. By breaking a sword or bending a torque, the Celts were freeing its spirit, sending it beyond the physical realm as a messenger to the deities below. But why water? Archaeology offers clues. Many Celtic water deposits cluster at natural thresholds, river confluences, lake outlets, or whirlpools, sites where the movement of water created liminal zones. The Celts viewed these dynamic spaces as junctions between worlds where prayers carried extra weight. The discovery of animal remains, particularly horses and dogs, alongside metal artifacts, hints at ceremonies mimicking myths of aquatic deities. In Irish lore, the god Manannán mac Lir ruled a submerged paradise, while Welsh legends tell of lakes that granted immortality or swallowed entire kingdoms as punishment. To cast offerings into these waters was to tap into their stories, to participate in a cycle of giving that stretched back to creation itself. Modern excavations reveal patterns in these submerged sanctuaries. Lyn Seirg box offerings peak during periods of Roman invasion, suggesting frantic appeals for protection against an unstoppable foe. Contrast this with the River Thames in England, where Bronze Age swords precede Celtic settlement, indicating these traditions were inherited from even older cultures. Some sites, like The Chinese letter, Japanese letter, Chinese letter in France, show layers of deposits spanning millennia, proof that certain locations held unbroken sacred significance across generations. The most poignant finds are personal items: a child's shoe in Switzerland's Lake Neuchâtel, a delicately carved wooden figurine in Ireland's Lagor Crannog. These weren't displays of wealth, but raw, intimate negotiations with forces beyond human control. Perhaps the most chilling underwater shrine lies in Denmark's Illerup, where thousands of weapons were systematically shattered and submerged after a single cataclysmic battle. Though not Celtic, this site mirrors their logic, destroying the tools of war to prevent their energy from cursing the living. At Lyn Seirg Bach, the presence of slave chains complicates the narrative. Were these offerings of gratitude for victory or pleas for absolution from the horrors of conquest? The lake keeps its silence, but the artifacts scream across centuries. Today, fishermen's nets still occasionally snag on ancient metal in these waters, and storms expose long-buried treasures along eroded banks. Each discovery chips away at the old stereotype of the Celts as mere warriors. These weren't mindless acts of disposal. They were acts of faith, a complex dialogue between people and the unseen. When you stand by the still surface of Lyn Seirg Bach at dusk, watching the water swallow the last light of day, it's hard not to feel the weight of those unanswered prayers. The offerings may be corroded, the gods they honored long forgotten, but the longing they represent for protection, for meaning, for connection, still ripples through time. Music wasn't just entertainment for the Celts, it was a weapon, a prayer, and a direct line to the otherworld. That's why when invaders sought to crush their spirit, they didn't just burn villages, they banned instruments. Among the most forbidden was the crwth, a peculiar six-stringed lyre whose melodies were said to summon storms or lull warriors into battle trances. With its curved wooden frame and horsehair strings, the crwth produced a sound unlike anything else, haunting and hollow, like wind through bare branches. Early Christian scribes called it the devil's harp, not because it was evil, but because its music held a power they couldn't control. Manuscripts from medieval Wales reveal shocking decrees. Anyone caught playing the crwth risked losing a hand, their fingers severed to silence the old magic forever. But the crwth wasn't alone in persecution. The bones, a deceptively simple percussion instrument made from animal ribs, were outlawed for a darker reason. When played between the fingers in rapid rhythms, their clacking echoed the cadence of galloping horses, a sonic signal used to coordinate rebellions across distant hills. Roman chronicles describe how Celtic scouts communicated battle plans through coded bone patterns, their messages indecipherable to enemy ears. After the conquest, edicts demanded bones be melted down into glue, erasing not just a tool but a covert language of resistance. The revival of these instruments centuries later reads like a clandestine operation. In remote Irish monasteries, monks secretly preserved CRWTH techniques by transcribing them as harmless liturgical chants. Welsh shepherds taught themselves bone rhythms using carved sticks, passing the art off as children's games. What saved them wasn't just secrecy, but their very simplicity. A CRWTH could be carved from driftwood, bones scavenged from any feast. They were weapons of the poor, impossible to fully eradicate. Today, these once banned sounds are experiencing a renaissance. Modern musicians like Cas Murig have reconstructed CRWTH playing styles from cryptic medieval marginalia, while bands like Celtic Fusion weave bone rhythms into electronic beats, creating a bridge between ancient and modern. The real power of these instruments lies not in their notes, but in their defiance, proof that culture, once rooted deep enough, can never truly be silenced. Hearing a CRWTH's drone today is to witness a 1,000-year-old act of rebellion, still vibrating through time. When Rome fell and Christianity spread its shadow across Europe, the old Celtic gods didn't vanish, they went underground, wearing new masks to survive. In the quiet corners of Ireland, Scotland, and Brittany, pagan traditions clung to life, not through rebellion but through cunning assimilation. Holy wells, once sacred to Brigid, the goddess of healing, became sites of Christian pilgrimage, their waters still believed to cure ailments, only now under the banner of Saint Brigid. The ancient festival of Imbolc, marking the first stirrings of spring, was rebranded as Candlemas, its fires relit as church candles. Even the Celtic Otherworld didn't disappear. It simply migrated into folklore as the land of the fairies, a realm just beyond mortal sight where the old deities lingered under new names. The resilience of these traditions lay in their adaptability. Take the Clutie wells, where strips of cloth are tied to trees as offerings. To the untrained eye, they resemble Christian prayer rags, but their roots stretch back to pre-Christian rites where rags represented ailments left behind in the sacred waters. Similarly, the Wren boys of Ireland, who parade through villages on St. Stephen's Day, echo much older midwinter rituals where the wren, a bird sacred to Druids, was hunted as a symbol of the dying year. Even Halloween, with its jack-o'-lanterns and costumed revelry, is Samhain in a Christian disguise, its bonfires and spirit offerings preserved under a thin veneer of saints and sermons. But some holdouts were less subtle. In the Scottish Highlands, as late as the 17th century, fishermen whispered charms to Manannán mac Lir before setting sail, despite Presbyterian sermons condemning such heathenry. In Wales, the Mary L, with a ghostly horse skull carried door to door during winter, defied church bans, its riddles and demands for entry echoing older pagan door rites meant to ward off misfortune. These weren't mere superstitions, they were acts of quiet defiance, a way of keeping the old covenants alive even as the world changed around them. The most striking survival, though, lies in the land itself. Celtic holy sites were often co-opted by the church, but their power remained. Springs, trees, and stones once touched by Druids became shrines to martyrs, their original significance blurred but never erased. In Cornwall, the Cheese Ring, a bizarre rock formation, was said to be the work of saints, yet locals still left offerings there, just as their ancestors had. The pattern holds across Europe, a sacred yew standing beside a chapel, a stone circle repurposed as a churchyard. The message was clear: the old gods couldn't be driven out, only persuaded to share the space. Today, the legacy of these pagan holdouts is more visible than ever. Modern Druidry draws openly on reconstructed traditions, while scholars pore over medieval manuscripts for traces of the old ways. But the real testimony lies in the unbroken thread of practice: the farmer who still avoids cutting a lone hawthorn, the grandmother who tosses salt over her shoulder just in case. These aren't empty gestures, they're the last whispers of a world where every hill and stream had its spirit, where the divine was as close as the next breath. The Celts may have bowed to the new god, but they never forgot the old ones, and in the quiet places, if you listen closely, you can still hear them answering. From the cryptic whispers of Ogham script to the roaring echoes of the carnyx, these 25 hidden secrets shatter the old myth of the Celts as mere barbarians. What emerges instead is a portrait of a people who saw the world as a living, breathing network of meaning, where trees held sacred alphabets, lakes swallowed offerings to the gods, and warriors bound their souls to oaths written in blood. Their mastery of goldwork rivaled any empires, their chariots outpaced Rome's finest, and their druids wielded knowledge so potent it was never written down. The Celts weren't just fighters, they were astronomers tracking lunar cycles with eerie precision, engineers crafting suspension systems centuries ahead of their time, and poets whose myths refused to let death be the end of the story. Think of Boudicca's defiant stand, her tomb forever lost, yet her legend burning brighter than the city she raised. Or imagine standing among Beltane stones, feeling the weight of celestial alignments carved into rock by hands long turned to dust. Every bog body pulled from the peat, every talk unearthed from a forgotten hoard, forces us to rewrite history's hasty judgments. These weren't primitive tribes, they were philosophers of the natural world, architects of the invisible, keepers of secrets that still ripple through our languages, festivals, and superstitions. So which secret spoke to you? Was it the shapeshifters weaving through myths, reminding us identity is fluid, the forbidden instruments whose music defied suppression? Or perhaps the sacred groves where every leaf pulsed with divine energy? The beauty of Celtic history lies in its unfinished puzzles, the gaps where our knowledge ends and wonder begins. That's where you come in. Share your favorite revelation in the comments, debate the mysteries we're still unraveling, and if this journey through the Celtic world left you hungry for more, dive deeper. Books like Miranda Aldhouse Green's The Celtic Myths or Barry Cunliffe's The Ancient Celts await, and sites from Anglesey to the Hill of Tara-Beacon the Curious. The Celts may have vanished from the map, but their legacy, that's still being written, one uncovered secret at a time.